Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kiorkof, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my must-draft wide receivers for the 2023 fantasy football season. Now, in the last couple episodes, we have talked about variables in fantasy football that are often overlooked, one being offensive lines and how well they run block, and the other being coaching changes that we have witnessed this offseason. Now, another variable I wanted to focus on is experience, specifically in terms of wide receivers going from year one in 2022 to their second year in 2023, and how much of an uptick of production we are going to witness based on the statistics that I've gathered over the last 5 seasons. Of course, I'm going to mention those statistics right now, but the entire purpose of today's video is to give you more confidence as you approach your 2023 fantasy football draft by looking at these prospects as not only guys that are younger, but have the potential of being top 24, top 12, maybe even top 5 in some of these circumstances, producers this upcoming season based on the history of success that we have found from second-year wide receivers. Now, in order to share these statistics with you guys, I've gone ahead and presented them on screen to the right. So let's go ahead and let's review them right now. From 2017 through 2021, the last 5 seasons in which we've seen rookie wide receivers go to their second year, we have experienced 21 wide receivers who have averaged 8.5 or more fantasy points per game in year one in a half PPR scoring format. Now, 15 of those 21 wide receivers, which is 71.43%, had improved fantasy point per game averages in year two. A pretty solid contingency of that year one wide receiver group that continue to improve going into year two. Fantastic. Now, when you exclude injuries to specific players who missed time, specifically one throughout the last 5 seasons that I can account for, which is Deebo Samuel, and you remove him from the list, we have 15 of those 20 wide receivers that had improved fantasy point per game production in their second year, which is a 75% rate. 3 out of every 4, which in my mind bodes pretty well for us going into this upcoming season. Now, the main reason I focused on 8.5 or more fantasy points is because when you take 8.5 fantasy points and you multiply that by 17 games played throughout the regular season, we find that that leads to 144.5 fantasy points. If you take 144.5 fantasy points and you apply that into a half PPR scoring format, in 2022, that was the number 33 overall wide receiver, while in 2021, that was the number 34 overall wide receiver. Great overall production, especially if you play in a league in which you have 12 teams, 3 starting wide receivers. These are contributors, if not starters, for your team. Now, while we stay on the topic of top 36 producers, let's continue on to the following graphic. As you guys can see on screen, we're talking about continued success of production after your rookie season, specifically maintaining a top 36 standing at the position. Since 2017, we have seen, of course, 17 different wide receivers rank within the top 36 wide receivers in year one in a half PPR scoring format. Going into year two, 13 of those 17 wide receivers, which is 76.47%, ranked as top 36 wide receivers in year two. A pretty strong contingency, over 75% this time. Now, if you go ahead and you exclude injuries, 2 of them being Cooper Kupp, where he tore his ACL that one season, and of course, Deebo Samuel in his second year, we have 13 of the 15 eligible wide receivers, which is an 88% success rate of these players who were top 36 in year one, once again maintaining top 36 standing in year two. This being the strongest number that I have found to date. Now, when we talk about the average improvement of top 36 wide receivers going from year one to year two, statistically, I found that the average improvement of these players was about 24% in terms of an increase in targets, 25.66% in an increase of receptions, 21.25% in receiving yards, and 12.11% in receiving touchdowns. Across the board, on average, these receiving options are absolutely taking a step forward and finding themselves a lot of success after having a top 36 standing in year one. Now, later on in today's video, we're going to talk about some of these eligible wide receivers that have the ability to find success in year two, like a Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Christian Watson, Drake London, George Pickens, all of them who in a half PPR were top 36 last season, and hopefully we'll be able to do the same and take those steps forward this upcoming season. Now, even though I mentioned a lot of names, there are still a contingency of wide receivers that going into year two have the ability to get experience and improve. Specifically, I'm talking about wide receivers who were first round selections in 2022 who have the potential to step up in 2023. Since 2017 through 2021, we have witnessed 11 wide receivers that were selected in the first round that didn't meet a top 36 ranking within their rookie season. 4 of those 11 wide receivers produced a top 36 standing in their following year, year two, which of course experience led to their overall upside, guys like Mike Williams, DJ Moore, etc. That's only a 36% rate, but if you exclude injuries in that entire conversation, that's 4 out of 7. So when we're talking about guys like Jahan Dotson, potentially even Treylon Burks, players that were selected in the first round, Jameson Williams in the 2022 season in which they didn't have a top 36 standing. Now, as we're all aware, Jameson Williams has been suspended for 6 games. So it's up to Treylon Burks or Jahan Dotson to potentially take the step forward and become a top 36 standing wide receiver by the end of 2023. Now, if you go ahead and look at from 2017 through 2021, first round wide receiver selections, there were 7 of them that were top 36 in their rookie season, and every single one of them, once again, were top 36 in their second year. Now, this specifically highlights guys like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, and Drake London. All 3, absolutely without a doubt in my mind, are going to take steps forward this upcoming season. Specifically, 2 of them are getting an improvement in terms of their quarterback play. One with Aaron Rodgers, one with Derek Carr. The other one will still be with Desmond Ridder, but either way, they're all going to make improvements in 2023. And before we talk about each of them individually, I do want to remind you guys, if you have not yet already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. We're making daily fantasy football content for the entirety of the 2023 season. Again, we're trying to reach 100,000 subscribers, so if you can help us get there, it'd be greatly appreciated, because the entire purpose of this channel is to help you win a 2023 fantasy football championship. Now, for those of you who are trying to gain an even bigger advantage upon your league mates and help yourself win a 2023 fantasy football championship, travel down to the description of the video and click on the link that takes you on over to Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you go ahead and sign up using code Andrew via Underdog Fantasy and make a first-time deposit minimum of $10, you're not only going to get a first-time deposit match up to $100, you're additionally going to get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. That draft guide is hundreds of hours of information that I've collected this offseason that'll lead to your success. Those rankings are by position and by tier positions: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense. Top 200 flex for half and full PPR. All of that available to you immediately when making that first time deposit minimum of $10. Now, on top of it, besides getting that draft guide, I will also be sending you an updated version of that draft guide every single week throughout the entire month of August, which will include updated rankings. Again, be sure to check your spam folder for both the initial draft guide that you will get from Underdog Fantasy, and additionally, the spam folder for when I send you guys updates to this draft guide, just kind of going ahead and presenting it on screen for those of you who are interested. Additionally, throughout the entirety of the season, from weeks 1 through 18, I will also be sending you weeks 1 through 18 rankings for half and full PPR by position, by tier. These rankings will be sent to you every single Sunday morning in order to help you win. Of course, figure out who you're starting, whether it's your starting quarterback, tight end, flex, whether you're having a bye-apocalypse. These rankings will help you every single week, weeks 1 through 18, regardless of scoring format, half, full PPR, in order to help you. So, take advantage of the opportunity on hand. Help me help you. For those of you who are wondering whether you're eligible, of course, the map to Underdog Fantasy eligibility is to the right side of the screen. Depending on where you're currently located, it should determine whether or not you could sign up and draft today. For those of you who are, of course, interested in gaining experience and drafting away, be sure to check out one of the many best ball drafts they have available today, because you can go ahead and gain some experience prior to your league draft, because practice makes perfect. Check it out today. Use promo code Andrew. Thank you very much. All right. Let's get into talking about some of these must-draft wide receivers after we've gone over a lot of statistics already. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson. It is pretty simple. I'm sure you know to draft Garrett Wilson. His current ADP via Underdog Fantasy sits at ADP wide receiver 9 and 13.8 overall, which again is the beginning of the second round. It really isn't a surprise to me, considering how incredible he was last season and the expectation of his year 2 jump this upcoming year with Aaron Rodgers under center. Now, in his rookie season with Joe Flacco and or Mike White under center, in the 8 games where he played with both of those starting quarterbacks, Garrett Wilson averaged 14.23 fantasy points per game. So average quarterback play led to a lot of production. Now, when Zach Wilson was under center in the 9 games they played together, unfortunately, Garrett Wilson was not the same, only averaging 6.71 fantasy points per game. A huge difference there. So imagine what we're going to see when we inject Aaron Rodgers into this offense. We're talking about Garrett Wilson, who last season, in games in which he had 5 or more receptions, was averaging 16.46 fantasy points per game. Incredible production. We know that Aaron Rodgers can elevate an offense, specifically elevate a wide receiver 1. Since 2008, wide receiver 1s in an Aaron Rodgers-led offense have averaged 131 targets, 86 receptions, 1,186 receiving yards, and 10 receiving touchdowns per season on average. Incredible numbers that I'm absolutely expecting Garrett Wilson to potentially tread and or surpass based on the opportunities that they have on hand. They don't have a clear wide receiver 2. They have Allen Lazard, and that's fine. But outside of that, Corey Davis, McCole Hardman, Tyler Conklin, of course, the backs are going to get themselves receptions, regardless of whether it is Breece Hall or Michael Carter. But we all know, and even the Jets know, if you guys watched the Hard Knocks last night, Garrett Wilson is the guy that is going to be Aaron Rodgers' best friend within this offense, and they're going to have a great year in 2023. Now, the other wide receiver I wanted to mention, of course, that has the potential to make that huge year 2 jump is Chris Olave. We talked about it earlier. Chris Olave now has Derek Carr, and Derek Carr in the last 3 seasons as a Las Vegas Raider absolutely littered his number 1 receiving options with targets. Specifically, Darren Waller in 2020 had 145 targets that led to 107 receptions. Renfro in 2021, 128 targets, 103 receptions. Of course, this last season, Devontae Adams, 180 targets, 100 receptions. Specifically, if we take those 3 receiving options, Waller, Renfro, and Adams, and make them wide receivers based on the end of season production in terms of fantasy points, we have the number 8, number 11, and number 3 overall wide receivers in terms of what Derek Carr has been able to support for fantasy purposes. So absolutely, the sky is the limit for Chris Olave going into this upcoming season. A wide receiver that last year, when given 6 or more targets, averaged 12.37 fantasy points per game. 6 targets is going to be a pretty easy number to achieve for Chris Olave, especially in conjunction with this offense and how they want to approach with Derek Carr under center. Specifically, Chris Olave having himself 1,686 air yards. He was ranked 6th amongst all receiving options last season with that number. The reason why I specifically want to mention that is because Chris Olave was a deep threat last season, and he was incredible at that. Obviously, the quarterback play did not elevate his overall production in those regards, but last season, Chris Olave was number 8 amongst all wide receivers in terms of deep targets, 20 or more yards down the field. When we talk about what Devontae Adams did in those overall opportunities in 2022 in terms of targets that were 20 or more yards down the field, Devontae Adams had 9 touchdowns accounted in that overall range. There's a lot of potential here, especially considering in terms of attempts of 20 or more yards down the field, passing attempts. Derek Carr was number 4 amongst all quarterbacks, and he was number 9 in passing yards and number 3 in passing touchdowns, 20 or more yards down the field last year. Chris Olave, again, the sky is the limit. Moving on, we talk about Drake London, another one of these wide receivers who not only were first-round picks, they were top 36 in their first season. They all averaged over 8.5 fantasy points. They're baked in to have incredible top 36 standing this season, and hopefully, based on the percentages I mentioned early on in the episode, all take steps forward in every statistical category. Now, the thing about Drake London is the offensive association in comparison to an offense like the New Orleans Saints and or the New York Jets. They're probably going to be a little bit less pass heavy, especially with Desmond Ridder under center. But that even being said, last season, when Desmond Ridder helped close out the season from weeks 15 through 18 after Marcus Mariota's season-ending injury, we saw that Drake London averaged 9 targets, 6.3 receptions, 83 receiving yards, and 10.5 fantasy points per game with Desmond Ridder under center. There is a lot of potential here, especially considering how strong we saw the performances from Drake London kind of stack up at the end of the season. 4 of the last 5 games he participated in consisted of 70 or more receiving yards. In terms of receiving yards at the position last season, yards per route run, he was number 14 amongst all receiving options with a 2.07 average. Last season, whenever he was given opportunity, which again, it's going to be shy within this offense because they want to run the ball as much as they do, but anytime he was given 6 or more targets last season, he's averaging over 10 fantasy points per game, which is an incredible number to find. But again, the offensive weapons within this entire scheme, whether it be a Bijan Robinson, Cordero Patterson, Tyler Algier, Kyle Pitts, they brought in Scotty Miller, Mac Hollins, Jonnu Smith this offseason. They have more weapons that could potentially vie for targets. But you got to remember that Arthur Smith knows how to target and utilize a wide receiver one. He helped A.J. Brown accomplish that in both 2019 and in both 2020. So there is the potential in which you could elevate the play of Drake London, especially considering in those years with A.J. Brown, Arthur Smith and Ryan Tannehill only gave A.J. Brown about 6.33 targets per game, while Drake London last season already averaged 6.88. If that number continues to creep forward and he gets more looks in the red zone, he led the team in terms of red zone targets, 16 of them that led to 4 receiving touchdowns. The numbers continue to crawl forward. A lot of production up ahead for Drake London. Moving on. Let's talk about another must-draft prospect going into this upcoming season. It is Christian Watson. Many of you may be a little bit hesitant on the potential of Christian Watson considering he was so volatile last season, but with opportunity, this man contributes and he puts up points in bunches. From weeks 1 through 9 of last season, pretty much in the doghouse, dealing with some injuries, obviously wasn't in kind of rhythm with Aaron Rodgers. He took the back seat behind Romeo Doubs, and from weeks 1 through 9, the guy was averaging 3.62 half PPR fantasy points per game and was the number 110 overall wide receiver. And then something clicked. wide receivers went down, and they needed someone to step up within this offense. And absolutely, without a doubt, Christian Watson did so with his athleticism and his ability. From weeks 10 through 18, averaged 15.24 fantasy points per game. Throughout that 8-game span, was the number 7 overall wide receiver in fantasy football. Now, I know you may be thinking there is a potential in which Christian Watson can be the next Chase Claypool. I 100% can see the comparisons. Chase Claypool, his rookie year, incredible number of touchdowns. Obviously, the regression hit and it absolutely killed his overall fantasy value, and he missed the top 36 standings in a half PPR the following season. I think that based on the overall opportunities that Christian Watson was given in year one, the fact that he had only, 44 receptions will lead him to potentially having more opportunity this year with Jordan Love, looking to him as his wide receiver 1, getting him targets down the field. Last season, Christian Watson, in games in which he was targeted 6 or more times, averaging 17.19 fantasy points per game with a 24.44% target rate last season in terms of targets per route run, and of course a 2.26 yards per route run average, which was 11 amongst all wide receiver options last season. These are numbers that are extremely promising. So what does he need? Opportunity. And what does he have? A lot of it. Without Randall Cobb, Allen Lazard, Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, there's 224 vacant targets within this offense, who I believe LaFleur is going to continue to keep it as pass heavy as they have been the last couple of years with Aaron Rodgers, with Jordan Love. And of course, making Christian Watson not only someone who can be at his current ADP wide receiver 21, he can meet those numbers. But if he keeps up the touchdown potential, he could very easily be top 12 based on the overall production. I'm expecting regression in terms of touchdowns, don't get me wrong, but the yardage, the reception counts, the rushing yards, the rushing touchdowns he'll accumulate, those will even him out and make him a fantastic year 2 prospect. Moving on, let's talk about George Pickens, another one of these wide receivers that in year 1 was a top 36 player. Right now, his current ADP has him at wide receiver 38, which means he would have produced less in comparison to last year. I don't expect him to go downward. I expect him to make strides forward. He's a 22-year-old wide receiver who ran a 4.4 40. He's 6'3". On top of it, last season had an ADOT average depth of target of 15.6 yards down the field. Average depth of target that was 3rd amongst all wide receiver options in 2022. Additionally, had 1,300 air yards, which was 19th amongst all wide receivers. Now, in terms of the success that we saw him accomplish last season, especially out wide, having lined up out wide 83% of the snaps last season, additionally found a 72% success rate against press coverage. On top of it, had a contested target rate of 30.4%, which led to a 78.6% contested catch rate. Pretty ridiculous numbers. And honestly, if Kenny Pickett takes that step forward and we're looking at more opportunities and more potential production from a guy like George Pickens within this offense, I understand there's going to be a pretty ample amount of target kind of competition with Deontay Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, the backfield, and Allen Robinson being traded for this offseason. But remember, this is a wide receiver that had 52 receptions last year and 801 receiving yards. I mean, in terms of yards per target, 9.4, which was 14th ranked amongst all wide receiver options. There is a lot of upside here within this offense, especially at the young wide receiver position for George Pickens, who will absolutely be a top 36 player, and in his current ADP is a steal and a must-draft option. Moving on, let's talk about Jahan Dotson, a wide receiver that absolutely has the potential of being a top 36 player this season, if in fact this Washington Commanders offense can be potent in any sort of capacity. Currently, Jahan Dotson is wide receiver 39, but the reason why I believe there is a potential is because of his fantasy point per game average last season, averaging over 8.5. It was at about a 9.3 rate last season in a half PPR scoring format, based on what he was able to produce when he was healthy. From weeks 1 through 4, the guy averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game, scored 4 touchdowns in 4 games. Once he returned from injury from weeks 10 through 12, did nothing, averaged 1.33 fantasy points per game, and specifically had himself 2 receptions in 3 games, and then finally found his stride once again late in the season. Weeks 13 through 18, 12.58 fantasy point per game average, was a balanced receiver, scored 3 touchdowns in 5 games, and even with Sam Howell in that final game, 3 catches, 72 yards, 8.7 fantasy points, pretty decent production. I know this is a very dangerous game with Jahan Dotson, mainly because there is touchdown regression that is potentially in line for him. They have other receiving options like a Curtis Samuel that could end up taking away opportunities, along with guys like Antonio Gibson and Logan Thomas. But Jahan Dotson is a young up-and-coming receiver who this offseason has said, this is going to be my breakout year. who am I to say that that's potentially out of the realm of possibility? This is an offense that now has Eric Bieniemy as their offensive coordinator. They will be far more pass heavy than in comparison to seasons past, where this team has been a run first team without a doubt, trying to hide their quarterback. I think with Sam Howell and or Jacoby Brissett, we have the potential of, the number 2 wide receiver of the Washington Commanders for a second consecutive year being a relevant position. Last season, Curtis Samuel finished as wide receiver 33. Pretty good overall production for a guy that was relatively quiet that many of us has forgotten about since. Jahan Dotson has the potential. He's proven it based on the fact that he produced well in year 1. He is a first-round wide receiver and can make that step forward. There's a small contingency of wide receivers that do so, but Jahan Dotson could be in line for it. The final wide receiver we mentioned on today's video is Treylon Burks. It's going to be relatively difficult for Treylon Burks to break out as a second-year wide receiver. I do want to mention him on this list. I am far more confident in the 6 other prospects I mentioned, and I am targeting those prospects in my upcoming drafts. But Treylon Burks does, require a little bit of respect. This is a former first-round selection, a guy that, yes, in his rookie year was a little bit lackluster. We had all those training camp montages of him being out of shape, being injured, all these, rumors around this team, especially because of the fact that they traded away A.J. Brown and got the selection that they did and used it on Treylon Burks. And then we saw what A.J. Brown produced last season and how explosive he was and how he was absolutely worth every penny and they should have paid him. Nonetheless, Treylon Burks, going into year 2, has to deal with the competition of targets from DeAndre Hopkins. That is going to be something that is difficult, especially considering we have seen in the past with A.J. Brown and Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill can support a wide receiver 1 within an offense. And even though DeAndre Hopkins isn't, himself from the Houston days, he certainly still has some left in the tank, and he will absolutely be the number 1 funnel target option within this offense. An offense that since 2019 has been number 32 in terms of quarterback passing attempts, number 32 in quarterback passing completions, 27 in passing yards, and 17 in passing touchdowns. In terms of a per game average, the 66 games they've played since 2019, they've averaged 19 completions per game on 29 passing attempts. Not incredible numbers, especially when they're only averaging 223 passing yards and 1.5 passing touchdowns. There isn't enough opportunity to go around to a bunch of receiving options, but Treylon Burks has a chance to be relevant regardless. He is a young wide receiver. He has the ability. It's just a matter of, can he stay healthy enough for the entirety of the season to eventually have those opportune times to step up, be the number 1 in those instances in which DeAndre Hopkins is double covered. Because teams know DeAndre Hopkins is not going to line up out wide and run block. That is not what he's going to do. That's not why they paid him all this money. They're bringing him in to be a receiver. So when he's out there, it's going to be a pass play probably majority of the time. And when it is, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for Treylon Burks on the opposite side of the field, despite the fact that this is a run-first offense, to find himself receiving upside. Deep ball, short game, screen passes, he can do it all. Just got to stay healthy. And Ryan Tannehill also has to stay on the field, mainly because Willis and Levis, the number 2 and 3 quarterback of this team, cannot be trusted with these receiving options. But throwing it out there, could be a must-draft candidate based on his current ADP, could end up being relevant. I just typically, throughout my experience, never have trusted a number 2 receiving option within a Tennessee Titans offense, and I don't think I'm going to change it up much this season. I might have my rosters be a little bit more diverse and include some, couple sprinkles of Treylon Burks via Underdog Fantasy in my, best ball drafts. But other than that, I'm looking at these other guys with Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Drake London, Christian Watson, George Pickens being the guys that I absolutely need to have on my team. And then, of course, Jahan Dotson as the next tier. Then, of course, we talk about Treylon Burks with the lottery ticket potential at the end of the season. Okay, that's going to cover it for me today. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Hopefully, my must-draft wide receivers for the 2023 fantasy football season gave you more insight in terms of the potential of experience leading to success for year 2 wide receivers. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you have not yet already. Of course, hit the like button down below. It greatly helps support the channel. Additionally, for those of you who are trying to get my up-to-date rankings and draft guide, be sure to head on over to the link down in the description. Head on over to Underdog Fantasy. Use code Andrew. Make that first-time deposit minimum of $10. You'll go ahead and get my 2023 fantasy football draft guide and rankings. Those will be sent to you from Underdog Fantasy straight to you. Check your spam folder. Additionally, the updated rankings every single week will be sent from me, my email, to you. Keep an eye on that spam folder. Thank you, everybody. Be sure to take advantage of the opportunity because the rankings and the draft guide isn't where it ends. It continues on to the regular season every single Sunday morning with rankings, half PPR, full PPR, by tier, by position, in order to help you win a 2023 fantasy football championship. And that's it. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.